How did a cluster of simple cells in the ocean become the organ that can question its own existence? How did instincts of fear and survival transform into love, memory, and imagination? And if the brain built every story of humanity, then what story was it writing when it built itself? Welcome to Neuro Academy. Tonight we'll drift through the complete evolution of the human brain, a journey from the first sparks of nerve cells to the vast neocortex that imagines art, language, and even the universe itself. Over these hours, you'll see how survival shaped fear, how bonds shaped emotion, and how reflection shaped the self. But here's the deeper question. If your brain is the product of evolution, then is you just its latest invention, or something more? So close your eyes, let curiosity soften into calm, and tonight we begin with the first step, how life's simplest sparks began the path toward consciousness. You close your eyes and imagine an ocean before time had names. The water is warm, shallow, and thick with drifting particles of life. Sunlight filters down in trembling ribbons, touching clusters of cells that float together in fragile communities. There are no eyes yet, no voices, no memories, only chemistry. Molecules brush against one another, react, and dissolve. Yet within that quiet soup, something extraordinary is stirring, a faint electrical shimmer. The first hint that matter can carry a signal, and that signals might one day carry thought. It is easy to forget how much of you began in that invisible world. The story of your brain is not simply about grey folds inside your skull. It is the story of living matter, learning, step by step, to feel, to sense the difference between light and dark, between touch and absence, between what nourishes and what harms. That difference, life's earliest whisper of choice, was the seed of awareness. Imagine for a moment a cell that has developed a thin membrane more sensitive than its neighbours. It can detect a change in ions around it, a ripple in the salty water. That ripple makes it contract or move. Already this tiny organism has gained a sliver of advantage, a way to respond instead of drift. Multiply this by thousands, millions, and soon you have a population of cells that do more than exist. They communicate. They release signals that others can receive, turning survival into a conversation. These were the ancestors of neurons, the proto-neurons that made life interactive. Science tells us that around 600 million years ago, some of the simplest animals, like sponges and cnidarians, began experimenting with this. Sponges, though primitive, filter water in ways that suggest coordination, a faint choreography between cells. Jellyfish and their relatives carried it further, creating diffuse webs of nerve cells spread like fishing nets through their gelatinous bodies. No central brain, no command tower, just a net of sensation where touch in one part of the body rippled outward, preparing the creature to contract, to swim, to flee. This was not yet thought, but it was the first architecture of response. Picture it as a night sky scattered with lanterns. Each lantern flickers on its own, but when the wind stirs, the flames sway together, forming patterns. That dance of lights was the origin of neural activity. It was not sharp, not deliberate, but it was enough to let an animal survive in a world that demanded constant reaction. And here lies the philosophical marvel. From the beginning, life's story has been about connection. The cell alone can live, but it is vulnerable, unknowing. A cell that communicates joins a web larger than itself. It trades independence for interaction, but in that trade, it gains possibility. Isn't that the same trade you make every day as a human being? Alone you could survive, perhaps, but only through connection with others, with ideas, with stories do you begin to thrive. If you walk along a crowded street, you are living proof of this evolutionary truth. Each glance exchanged, each unspoken cue of movement, is your modern nervous system playing out the same drama as those early nerve nets: connection, coordination, response. The brain you carry is not just an organ of thought, it is an ancient web refined, and every time you feel a spark of recognition in another's eyes, you echo that first flicker of cells touching through the ocean's salt. But there is more. Those early networks hint at something beyond mere survival. Consider how a jellyfish moves, not randomly, but rhythmically, pulsing in cycles that resemble intention. Beneath that pulse is an emergent order, the ghost of decision. This is where philosophy and science meet, at the threshold between reaction and choice. At what point does a pattern become a mind? The earliest neurons did not ask questions, yet they opened the doorway to beings that eventually could. In them we see the first proof that matter is not fixed, not silent, but capable of carrying information forward. Each signal was a note, each network a song, and with time, those songs became symphonies: sight, memory, imagination. Pause with that thought. The entire arc of human reflection, your ability to wonder why you exist, rests upon those first fragile signals drifting in the sea. Without them, there would be no poems, no mathematics, no memory of love. All of it depends on the simple fact that life, at some point, decided to talk to itself. And so the question lingers: if a cluster of cells could become awareness, what might awareness still become? Evolution did not end with you. The same current that moved through the ocean's first nerve nets moves through your thoughts tonight. Perhaps you are simply another step in the same unfolding story, a chapter in the universe, learning to look at itself. The journey deepens here, for the scattered nets of jellyfish were not enough. Life would need a new design, something more centralized, more capable of layering reactions into complex plans. That leap was not random. It began with a structure as humble as it was revolutionary: the neural tube, forming in early embryos. From it, the first true nervous systems would emerge, and the long road toward the human brain would begin to take shape. You find yourself drifting further into that primordial ocean, where the water carries more than life, it carries potential. Picture a cluster of cells bending inward, forming a groove, then sealing into a hollow tube. This tube, so fragile at first, is the foundation upon which every nervous system in history would rise. Even in human embryos today, only weeks old, this same shape appears as though memory itself has been passed down in tissue. It is called the neural tube, and it is the seed from which your spinal cord and brain will grow. Think of it as a reed flute, slender and hollow, waiting for breath to give it voice. The tube is not yet a brain, but it holds the architecture of one. Along its length, specialized regions begin to form, some cells destined to become motor nerves, others sensory, still others future clusters of control. In this modest cylinder lies the map of possibility, the potential to transform reflex into thought, sensation into awareness. Science shows us that the earliest animals with neural tubes appeared more than 500 million years ago. These creatures were still simple, but their design allowed a leap beyond the diffuse nerve nets of jellyfish. For the first time, signals could be gathered, organized, and sent along a central path. The body was no longer just a blur of responses, it had direction. A head could now differ from a tail, a front from a back. Life could move toward or away with more precision. Imagine the difference between standing in a crowd that moves aimlessly and stepping into a line where everyone faces the same way. The energy changes, movement gains coherence. That is what the neural tube gave to life, a pathway of order. With it, animals began to distinguish where they were going, and evolution took a decisive step towards structure. But the tube's importance is more than anatomical. It is a metaphor for the human search itself. All growth begins with a narrowing, a focusing. Just as the embryo folds its tissue to form a line of promise, your own thoughts fold inward before they expand outward. Every idea begins with concentration, with a line drawn from chaos into direction. In this sense, the neural tube is not just a biological invention, it is the first whisper of purpose. Inside that tube, tiny electrical impulses start to find rhythm. They are not yet complex, but they create a pulse, a flow from one end to the other. If you could listen closely, it would feel like the faintest drumming in the deep life, learning to send signals along a single corridor. Over time, those corridors thickened into cords, cords branched into networks, and networks blossomed into brains. And so the neural tube is both humble and majestic. Humble because it is only a tube of cells, silent and unseen. Majestic because without it, no creature could have developed a central nervous system. It is the unseen blueprint beneath every gesture you make, every thought you form. Pause with that thought. When you lift your hand to touch your face, or when you remember a voice from your past, you are moving through pathways that trace back to that original hollow line. It is not exaggeration to say that in every moment of your awareness, the neural tube still lives. Philosophically, the tube also raises a question: is structure the price of growth? The jellyfish, with its scattered nerve nets, lives free of central control, pulsing in the ocean as a whole. But the creatures with neural tubes chose a different destiny: to concentrate their signals, to appoint a center, to give command. From this choice came progress, but also hierarchy. The first leaders, the first followers, written not in politics but in tissue. And you too embody this paradox. You are both free and directed, both network and center. Your thoughts wander, yet your prefrontal cortex decides. You contain both the diffuse net of the jellyfish and the straight line of the neural tube. Perhaps this is why we struggle between freedom and order, between drifting and choosing. Our very biology remembers both paths. The story now begins to accelerate. The neural tube will not remain empty. It will swell, bulge, and specialize into regions that anticipate the brain itself. The stage is set for the first true central nervous systems, where invertebrates take the leap from scattered reactions to organized patterns of behavior. In this next turn of evolution, life discovers the power of centralization, and the outlines of thought grow sharper. The image sharpens. You are no longer floating in an open ocean, but watching a shape emerge inside the fragile body of an early embryo. At first it is only a faint groove along a sheet of tissue, but then the edges rise, fold, and close like the seam of a book binding itself. What was once flat becomes a tube, and that tube, already humming with possibility, begins to swell at certain points. These swellings are the earliest hints of a brain. In your own embryonic history, this moment came only weeks after conception. The neural tube you carried within you ballooned in 3 places. Scientists call them the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. They are not yet distinct regions of thought, but their promise is written clearly. Like the foundations of a house, their outlines determine what structures can rise above them. From these bulges would one day grow the circuits for movement, vision, emotion, and memory. Picture it as a river splitting into 3 streams. Each stream carves its own channel, yet all remain part of one flow. The hindbrain, sitting closest to the spinal cord, will guard survival, breathing, balance, heartbeat. The midbrain will coordinate sensation and movement, allowing creatures to orient toward light, sound, or touch. And the forebrain, still small at this stage, will become the seat of imagination, learning, and reflection. Even in its infancy, this triad holds the architecture of the future human mind. Why does the embryo form a tube instead of some other shape? Because a tube provides both protection and direction. It allows fluid to bathe the delicate cells, cushioning them while carrying nutrients. It creates a closed environment where signals can be tested and refined, and it establishes a path, front to back, top to bottom. In this way, the nervous system gains not only a structure, but also an orientation. Philosophically, this carries weight. To have a tube is to have a path, and to have a path is to move forward. Life enfolding itself into a line, committed to time. Before the neural tube, existence was a matter of drifting, responding in every direction. After the tube, existence leaned toward progress, toward a future that could differ from the past. The very shape of the nervous system became a symbol of becoming. Now pause and imagine this at a scale beyond your body. Imagine the universe itself folding inward, creating channels where energy could flow, stars form, planets spin, rivers cut valleys. Everywhere you look, nature seems to prefer lines and channels, not chaos. The neural tube is one echo of this larger principle, structure born from folding, order rising from symmetry. As the tube grows, tiny clusters of cells within it begin to specialize. Some become sensory neurons, ready to carry information from the outside world. Others become motor neurons, prepared to command muscles. Still others take up the quiet work of connecting the two, ensuring that signals do not die midway. Already the embryo contains a dialogue, sensation meeting action, perception meeting response. The first primitive reflexes stir. It is tempting to think of these embryos as blank, waiting to be filled, but in truth they are rehearsing. The nervous system fires practice signals, testing circuits, pruning what is unnecessary, strengthening what works. Even before birth, the brain learns through repetition, shaping itself by experience. That same principle never leaves you. Each time you practice a skill, whether tying your shoes or playing an instrument, you are echoing the embryo's rehearsal, sending signals until the pathways smooth into familiarity. And so the neural tube is more than an early scaffold. It is a teacher. It shows us that growth is not passive but active, that even before thought, the brain learns by doing. Every signal matters. Every repetition shapes the outcome. The embryo whispers the same truth that philosophers later would. We become what we practice. From this tube, evolution would soon carve more complex structures. Flatworms and simple invertebrates would centralize their ganglia along its line, beginning the first steps toward true brains. The nervous system was no longer a net spread across a body. It was becoming a ladder, a cord, and at its summit, a cluster of command. That cluster would grow, layer by layer, into the organ you carry now. The next step in this story takes us into the world of invertebrates, creatures without backbones but with the earliest prototypes of centralized control. Here, life experimented with small brains, ganglia, and the difference between scattered sensation and concentrated command. From their efforts, the logic of centralization was born, and the stage was set for the first real brains of the animal kingdom. Imagine a flatworm gliding silently through murky water. Its body is soft, almost translucent, and yet within it lies something astonishing, not just a net of sensation, but a pair of clusters, tiny concentrations of nerve cells at the head. These clusters are ganglia, the first glimmers of a central brain. The worm is simple, but already it demonstrates a leap beyond the drifting nets of the jellyfish, where before every stimulus spread across the body like ripples on a pond. Now there is focus, a center of control. This was a turning point in the history of minds. With the arrival of ganglia, creatures could process information in one place before sending commands outward. Instead of every part of the body reacting equally, decisions could be made and then transmitted. This was the first sketch of hierarchy in the nervous system, a miniature capital city governing the provinces of the body. Think of it this way. A jellyfish is like a village where every person votes instantly on what to do next, leading to a collective but slow decision. A flatworm, with its ganglia, is like a village that elects a council. The council listens, decides, and acts on behalf of the whole. This makes movement faster, sharper, more efficient. It is no wonder that creatures with centralized nervous systems began to thrive. Science confirms this shift in early invertebrates. Flatworms, annelids, and insects developed nerve cords running along their bodies, with clusters of ganglia at regular intervals. Each cluster handled local functions, movement of a segment, coordination of a limb, but the head ganglia grew dominant. From this dominance, the first outlines of a brain began to emerge. The body was no longer just a machine of reflex, it was a system of command and delegation. Pause here, because the philosophical echoes are striking. Centralization always carries a trade. It grants speed, power, and unity, but it also introduces dependence. A jellyfish can lose parts of its body and still function, because every cell has some autonomy. A worm or an insect depends on its head. Damage to the central ganglia can disable the whole. Life exchanged resilience for efficiency. Perhaps this is why human societies wrestle with the same dilemma, whether to value distributed freedom. These ganglia were also laboratories for specialization. Insects, for example, developed optic lobes to process vision, antennal lobes for smell, and motor centers to control wings. Each ganglia became like a workshop, refining its craft. The insect brain, though tiny, could handle astonishing complexity, navigation, communication, even rudimentary learning. Ants and bees, descendants of these innovations, show us how much can be achieved when small brains specialize and coordinate. And yet, in all this progress, there remains humility. The brain of a bee, smaller than a grain of sand, can guide it back to a hive miles away, through landscapes it has never seen before. The brain of a worm can learn to avoid harmful substances after only a few encounters. Intelligence, it seems, is not simply a matter of size, but of structure and connection. For you, this offers reflection. Your own brain is vast compared to these creatures, but it is built on the same principles: clustering, specialization, delegation. You too rely on councils within yourself, one network for memory, another for fear, another for movement. You, like the flatworm, are a federation of ganglia, only infinitely more refined. To know this is to recognize continuity. The architecture of your mind is not a sudden miracle, but a patient accumulation of solutions, one layered on another. Picture again that flatworm gliding through water. It is not conscious in the way you are, but it represents the dawn of a new era. Its ganglia mark the first spark of central thought. From this point forward, evolution would favor creatures who could sense, process, and act with increasing precision. The stage was set for fish, with their swelling forebrains and first distinct regions of command. From their skulls would rise the template of the vertebrate brain, and with it, the next great chapter in this unfolding story. Imagine standing at the edge of a prehistoric shoreline. The water ripples with life, and among the darting shadows you notice the first true fish, creatures armored with bone, their eyes gleaming like polished stones. Within those skulls, something remarkable has taken shape, the beginnings of a brain divided into distinct regions, no longer just a cluster of ganglia, but an organ with separate bulges, each with its own promise. Scientists describe these divisions as the forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain, the prosencephalon, mesencephalon, and rhombencephalon. At first they were only gentle swellings in the neural tube, but over time they became the architecture of vertebrate thought. The hindbrain regulated balance and automatic functions, the midbrain processed vision and movement, and the forebrain, still small but growing, laid the groundwork for memory and learning. Picture a fisherman's net stretched across the water. Instead of every knot responding equally, certain knots begin to specialize. One catches larger fish, another filters smaller ones. The vertebrate brain evolved the same way. By dividing its labor, it became more efficient. Each region could refine its task, while together they wove a web of survival. This division was a quiet revolution. Fish needed to navigate complex environments, shifting currents, lurking predators, and the dazzling play of light underwater. A diffuse nerve net could never manage such demands, but a brain with separate regions could. One part could process vision, detecting a flash of movement, while another coordinated a rapid turn of the body, and yet another stored the memory of a safe hiding place. The fish brain was not yet human, but it was undeniably strategic. And here philosophy enters. The brain's separation into regions mirrors a truth of existence. Specialization creates strength. A community where each member does everything may survive, but a community where each member masters one skill can flourish. Nature understood this long before humans did. Division of labor is not only social, it is neural, embedded in the very roots of vertebrate life. Think also of the symmetry. 2 eyes feeding signals to the midbrain, 2 ears balancing sound, 2 halves of the body coordinated by 1 spinal cord. Symmetry is nature's way of balancing efficiency with resilience. To lose one eye is not to lose vision entirely. To lose part of the brain is not always to lose function altogether, because other regions may adapt. Evolution found safety in balance, and the vertebrate brain is its most elegant proof. But perhaps the most important gift of these early fish brains was foresight. With memory circuits growing in the forebrain, these animals could do more than react, they could learn. A predator encountered once could be avoided the next time. A pathway to food could be recognized again. Memory turned mere survival into strategy. Picture a fish swimming through a reef, finding a crevice where it escapes a predator. The next time danger approaches, it darts straight to that crevice. In that simple act, the future bends, the past informs the present, and a spark of continuity is born. That spark is the beginning of what you carry now, the ability to weave experiences into a story, to make the past matter. And so the first vertebrate brains reveal something essential. Intelligence is not an invention of humans, but an inheritance. The architecture of your own mind rests upon those early bulges. When you recall a face, when you balance as you walk, when your heart beats without command, all of it is built on the blueprint sketched in fish long ago. Pause with this realization. In every thought you form tonight, the forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain participate like 3 voices in a choir. They sing together, sometimes harmoniously, sometimes with tension, and that choir is not new, it is ancient, rehearsed for hundreds of millions of years in the waters where the first fish swam. The next step in this story leads us deeper into coordination. Among those early brains, a new structure began to thicken, tucked at the back like a quiet partner, the cerebellum. At first small, it would grow to become the master of balance, precision, and rhythm. With it, creatures could move not just with reaction, but with grace. Picture the body of an early amphibian, slippery and delicate, climbing from shallow waters onto damp land. Its limbs tremble, uncertain, as gravity demands a new kind of mastery. Beneath its skull a structure quietly expands, tucked at the back like a folded blossom. This is the cerebellum, the little brain. Small in size but vast in influence, it would become the architect of motion, balance, and coordination. The cerebellum first appeared in fish, where it was already essential for navigating shifting currents. To swim is not merely to move, but to adjust constantly. Left fin against right fin, tail flick against water drag. Without fine-tuned coordination, a fish would flounder. The cerebellum handled these calculations invisibly, ensuring fluid motion. As life crept onto land, its importance only grew. Limbs required balance, jaws required timing, eyes and head needed synchronization. Every leap, every breath on land, depended on this modest cluster of tissue. Think of the cerebellum as a conductor of an orchestra. The instruments, Muscles, joints, senses play their parts, but without a conductor, the music collapses into noise. The cerebellum does not create the notes, it shapes their rhythm, ensures their harmony, and refines their timing. It works so quietly that you never notice it, but without it, even the simplest gesture, a step, a blink, a swallow, would stumble. Science reveals that the cerebellum contains more neurons than any other single brain region, despite its small size. These neurons form dense, repeating circuits, optimized for speed and precision. Each moment you balance on one foot or track a moving object with your eyes, billions of signals ripple through this little brain, adjusting in fractions of a second. It is a machine of refinement, not invention, and yet refinement is the difference between survival and collapse. Pause and consider the philosophy of refinement. The cerebellum does not generate grand ideas or emotions. It polishes, corrects, and balances. Its genius is humility. In human life, we often chase invention, overlooking the power of refinement, the ability to take what already exists and make it smoother, more graceful, more alive. The cerebellum teaches that elegance is not in creating from nothing, but in perfecting what is given. Imagine now the world through the lens of rhythm. The beating of a heart, the gait of footsteps, the sway of breathing, all orchestrated into patterns. Rhythm is not only art, it is survival. To walk without rhythm is to fall. To breathe without rhythm is to suffocate. The cerebellum embodies rhythm in biology, just as music embodies rhythm in culture. Perhaps this is why music feels so profoundly natural to humans. It resonates with the very circuits that keep us balanced. In evolution, the cerebellum also opened doors to new behaviors. Amphibians could leap with control, reptiles could strike with precision, and birds could master the art of flight. Even complex vocalizations like birdsong rely on cerebellar timing. In humans, speech itself is shaped by these circuits. Every syllable, every pause, every cadence is refined by this quiet architect. When you speak fluently, you are drawing on a rhythm older than language itself. And here lies the deeper reflection. Grace is not an accident, it is built. When you marvel at a dancer's movement or a musician's timing, you are not only admiring artistry, but also the silent work of the cerebellum sculpted by millions of years. You carry that grace within you, whether or not you notice. Even as you lie still, listening now, your breathing steadies, your posture shifts unconsciously, guided by this little brain's endless vigilance. But evolution never stops at one step. Once creatures had balance and rhythm, another layer became necessary, the ability to recognize danger quickly and react with speed. This required more than coordination. It required circuits of alarm, readiness, and fear. At the core of that transformation was another ancient structure, the amygdala. Small, almond-shaped, and powerful, it would teach creatures the art of survival through vigilance and emotion. You are in a dark forest long before human history. The air is still, broken only by the rustle of leaves. A small creature pauses, sensing something it cannot see. Its heart races, its muscles tighten, its eyes widen. Deep inside its skull, a cluster of cells fires rapidly, an almond-shaped knot of tissue that evolution carved for a single purpose, survival. This is the amygdala, one of the brain's oldest guardians. The amygdala did not begin as a sculptor of complex feelings. In its earliest form, it was a circuit of alarm, tuned to detect threat and trigger escape. In fish, reptiles, and early mammals, these circuits decided instantly, stay, fight, or flee. A delayed response meant death. The amygdala became the seat of vigilance, its message blunt but vital: danger is near. Think of it as a fire alarm. It does not explain what burns or why, it only screams until you act. For early creatures, this simplicity was essential. A shadow in the water, the tremor of a predator's fin, the shift of air as a snake approached, all demanded an immediate choice. The amygdala became the brain's red siren, ensuring survival long before reasoning evolved. Science shows us that this almond-shaped structure sits deep in the temporal lobe, connected to both sensory systems and motor commands. It can bypass conscious thought, sending signals straight from the eyes or ears to the body. This is why, even now, you might jump at a sudden sound before realizing what caused it. Your modern brain still carries this ancient reflex, a gift from ancestors who lived or died by its speed. Pause and let the metaphor unfold. The amygdala is not only a circuit of fear, it is a sculptor of memory, events tied to strong emotion, whether danger or joy, carve themselves more deeply into your mind. This is why you recall vividly where you were during moments of shock or wonder. The amygdala strengthens memory through feeling, ensuring that what once mattered for survival is not forgotten. In this way, fear and memory are siblings, both born from the same ancient fire. Philosophically, the amygdala raises an old paradox. Is fear an enemy or a teacher? Without it, our ancestors would have walked carelessly into predators' jaws. With it, they lived, but they also carried the burden of constant vigilance. Even today, you carry echoes of that burden. Anxiety, panic, dread. These are the shadows of an ancient circuit doing its work too well. The same brain that saved lives in a dangerous forest can make you tremble in a safe room. Fear does not vanish with progress. It adapts, seeking new predators in the landscapes of modern life. And yet, fear is not the whole story. The amygdala also tuned early animals to positive signals, safety, nourishment, social bonds. It is not just the sentinel of terror, but the amplifier of meaning. When a mother mammal recognized her young, when two animals bonded for survival, their amygdalae strengthened the emotional weight of those moments. What began as fear became feeling. What began as flight became attachment. Imagine again that small creature in the forest. It freezes, senses danger, then darts to safety. In that act, the amygdala has done more than protect. It has rehearsed. The next time the same sound rustles the leaves, the creature will remember and act faster. Emotion, memory, and survival entwine in a single circuit. From this intertwining, the roots of human passion grow. And here lies the philosophical reflection. Perhaps fear is not a flaw to be eradicated, but a reminder of connection. To fear is to care about safety, about life, about what could be lost. Even your deepest anxieties whisper of value, of something within you worth protecting. The amygdala does not only scream of danger, it also whispers of love. But evolution never rests. The amygdala, powerful though it was, needed allies to coordinate breathing, heartbeat, and instinctive actions. Another structure expanded, the brainstem, the foundation of what would later be called the reptilian brain. With it came automation, ritual, and the routines that carry life forward without thought. Picture a reptile basking on a sun-warmed rock. Its eyes are still, its body motionless, yet beneath the surface its brainstem hums with tireless activity. Every breath, every beat of its heart, every flicker of muscle tension is maintained without effort. The animal does not think about breathing, does not plan how to digest its last meal, does not calculate the rhythm of its heartbeat. Deep inside, the brainstem, the ancient core of the nervous system, runs the body like a silent engine. The brainstem is among the oldest parts of the vertebrate brain. In fish, amphibians, and reptiles, it dominates, controlling functions so essential they cannot be left to chance. It is the autopilot of life, regulating heartbeat, breathing, swallowing, sleeping, and waking. Even in you, right now, this ancient structure sustains you without asking permission. Were it to falter, no higher thought could rescue you. Think of it as the foundation stones of a temple. The columns and carvings may rise beautifully above, but without the base, the entire structure would collapse. The brainstem is that base, carrying out the silent duties upon which all else rests. It is what allows the rest of the brain to exist at all, because only when survival is guaranteed can attention turn to higher tasks. In reptiles, this brainstem grew powerful, shaping what scientists later called the reptilian brain. It automated not just breathing and heartbeat, but also instinctive routines, hunting, mating, defending territory. These actions required little reflection. They were ritualized, repeated across generations. A lizard does not deliberate about chasing prey, it simply does. A snake does not weigh the philosophy of striking, it strikes. Such patterns are the signature of the reptilian brain, efficient, automatic, relentless. Pause and consider the paradox. Automation frees energy, but it also restricts freedom. To rely on instinct is to conserve effort, yet it is also to surrender choice. Reptiles thrived for millions of years with this brain, but their lives were rigid, bound to routines written in tissue. Humans carry these routines still, habits, compulsions, even the comfort of repetition. They are echoes of the reptilian brain within us. Philosophically, this raises a question: how much of your life is truly chosen, and how much is ritual carried forward by ancient circuits? The way you reach for food when hungry, the way you startle at sudden movement, the way you settle into familiar patterns, all bear the mark of the brainstem. Autonomy is real, but it grows from soil that is anything but free. And yet, automation is not an enemy. Without it, you would drown in decisions. Imagine if you had to consciously monitor every heartbeat, every breath, every swallow. Choice would suffocate beneath necessity. Instead, the brainstem takes these burdens away, gifting you the luxury of thought. It is the servant that makes the master possible. In evolutionary history, this foundation allowed new layers to rise. Mammals would later add the limbic system, coloring life with emotion. Primates would expand the neocortex, layering complexity upon instinct. But none of these could exist without the reptilian core, always humming beneath the surface. Even now, when you fall asleep and higher regions quiet, the brainstem keeps working. It is the unbroken rhythm of life. Picture again the reptile on the rock. Its stillness is not emptiness, but automation. Its body runs on circuits so old they predate memory. Within that stillness lies a truth about you as well. Beneath every complex thought, every plan, every philosophy, you too rest upon a foundation of rituals older than humanity. But evolution did not stop at automation. As mammals appeared, another layer emerged, the limbic system. It added warmth to the cold calculations of the reptilian brain. With it came not only survival, but bonding, memory, and the first sparks of love. Imagine a small mammal curled within its nest, its body trembling in the night air. Unlike a reptile, it does not simply bask in the sun or wander alone. It seeks warmth from its kind, listens for the cries of its young, and remembers the safety of familiar places. Deep inside its skull, a new network has begun to flourish, a system that brings not only survival, but connection. This is the limbic system, the circuitry of emotion and memory. The limbic system sits like a ring deep within the mammalian brain, woven around the reptilian core. Were the brainstem automated, the limbic system colored. It transformed raw survival into feeling, attaching meaning to events and weaving them into memory. The amygdala, which once screamed of danger, now worked in concert with the hippocampus, which stored experiences, and with the hypothalamus, which balanced hunger, thirst, and desire. Together, they created a theater of feeling, where life was no longer only about reaction, but about relationship. Think of it as the difference between surviving a storm and remembering how it felt. A reptile escapes the rain instinctively. A mammal escapes but also carries the imprint of cold and wet, the relief of shelter, the comfort of others nearby. That imprint shapes future choices. The storm is no longer just an event, it becomes a memory infused with emotion. Science shows us that the hippocampus, a curved structure within the limbic system, specializes in forming episodic memories, memories of where and when. Paired with the amygdala, these memories are prioritized. A frightening event etched more deeply than a neutral one, a joyful moment recalled more vividly than an ordinary day. This combination gave mammals a new survival tool, not only the ability to react, but the ability to anticipate, to plan based on remembered feeling. Philosophically, this is the dawn of meaning. To feel is to assign value. Hunger drives us toward food, but affection drives us toward one another. Pain warns us away, but joy calls us back. The limbic system taught mammals not just how to live, but what to care about, and in caring, they found reasons to stay close, to nurture, to protect. Love, in its first raw form, was not a poem, but a pattern of neurons firing deep within this system. Imagine again that small mammal. It recognizes the scent of its offspring, the warmth of its group, the comfort of familiar paths. Each recognition is not only stored but weighted with emotion. This weighting builds bonds. Without the limbic system, mammals would scatter as reptiles do, indifferent to each other. With it, they huddle, they nurse, they grieve. Out of circuitry came tenderness. And yet emotion is double-edged. What binds also blinds. The same circuits that produce love also produce jealousy, fear of loss, and rage against threat. In the limbic system, opposites live side by side, affection and aggression, comfort and despair. Perhaps this is why human life is so entangled with contradiction. Our emotional brain did not evolve for clarity but for survival, and survival often requires extremes. Still, without this system, the story of the brain would stall. The neocortex, which would later allow reasoning and abstraction, could only thrive upon the foundation of feeling. For what is thought without meaning? The limbic system ensured that information mattered, that memory carried weight, that survival included not only the body but the bond. Pause with that reflection. Every time you feel joy at a familiar voice, sorrow at a loss, warmth at a touch. You are living the legacy of this mammalian gift. Your most intimate moments, the ones that make you human, are written in circuits that began long before you. But the limbic system was not finished. Within it, one structure in particular would prove revolutionary, the hippocampus, curling like a seahorse deep in the temporal lobe. It would give mammals not only emotion, but the power to navigate through time and space, to remember where they had been and imagine where they might go. Imagine a small mammal scurrying through a dense forest at night. The air carries countless scents. The ground is littered with obstacles, and shadows stretch in every direction. To survive, it must remember more than fear. It must remember where it has been, which path led to food, which hollow offered safety from predators, which turn brought danger. Beneath its skull, a new structure coils like a curled seahorse, the hippocampus, the brain's cartographer. The hippocampus did something no reptilian brain had mastered. It organized experience into maps, spatial and temporal. When the mammal found a hollow tree and escaped danger, the hippocampus laid down a record. This place is safe. When it discovered a path to fruit, the hippocampus noted the landmarks. Over time, these records became a mental atlas, allowing the animal not just to react in the present, but to navigate based on the past. Science shows us that the hippocampus is central to episodic memory, the memory of events tied to places and times. Within it are networks of place cells, neurons that fire when an animal occupies a particular location. Together, these cells form a living map, updated as the creature moves. Other neurons track sequences, providing a sense of order: before, after, next. With these tools, mammals could link cause to consequence, location to outcome, memory to survival. Think of it as a lantern carried through a cave. Without it, every step feels unfamiliar, every corner unknown. With it, the path begins to make sense. The hippocampus is that lantern, illuminating the corridors of experience so they can be traveled again. And yet, the hippocampus offered more than navigation. It allowed the weaving of personal history. Each event was no longer isolated, but connected to others, creating a thread of before and after. For the first time, creatures carried not just instincts, not just feelings, but stories, rudimentary narratives of where they had been and what had happened there. This was the seed of autobiographical memory, the foundation of identity. Philosophically, the hippocampus reveals something profound. To remember is to anchor the self in time. Without memory, there is only the eternal present, a cycle of reactions without continuity. With memory, the present becomes part of a line, stretching backward into the past and forward into possibility. In remembering, the brain invents history, and in history, it begins to sense identity. Pause for a moment and reflect on your own hippocampus. It is at work now, quietly recording the rhythm of this moment, the imagined forest, the sound of these words, the sense of stillness as you listen. Later, when you recall this night, it will be the hippocampus that retrieves the memory, and it will not just recall facts, it will recall feeling, the comfort, the curiosity, the calm will all be woven into the map. But memory is fragile. The hippocampus does not store it forever. It hands the memory to other regions for long-term keeping. Some memories fade, others are strengthened by repetition or emotion. This fragility is both gift and curse. Without forgetting, the mind would drown in detail. With too much forgetting, it would lose its anchor. The hippocampus stands between, deciding what becomes story and what dissolves into silence. In human life, this balance gives rise to both beauty and sorrow. The joy of remembering a childhood home, the ache of forgetting a loved one's face, both trace back to this ancient seahorse-shaped organ. It is a reminder that your sense of self is built not on permanence, but on fragile threads, carefully tended by biology. And yet, out of that fragility came greatness. For once creatures could remember, they could also plan. A mammal could recall the path to food and anticipate tomorrow's hunger. A human could recall a tool used yesterday and shape a better one today. Memory extended survival into imagination, and imagination extended life into meaning. From here, evolution took another bold step. The maps drawn by the hippocampus needed a wider canvas. Memory and emotion required a larger stage, where sensation and thought could be layered with complexity. That stage would be the neocortex, the great expansion that distinguished mammals from reptiles, and that would eventually blossom into human thought. Picture the surface of a mammal's brain, smooth at first, then slowly folding in on itself, like paper crumpled gently to fit more words into less space. These folds are the hallmark of the neocortex, the new layer that would one day dominate the human brain. At its birth, the neocortex was not vast, not yet capable of philosophy or art, but even in its earliest forms, it was something revolutionary, a stage broad enough to host complexity. The neocortex arose as an expansion of the forebrain. In reptiles, the forebrain was modest, controlling smell and basic responses. But in mammals, it grew outward, spreading into a sheet that wrapped the brain like a blanket. To fit inside the skull, it folded and wrinkled, creating sulci and gyri valleys and ridges that multiplied its surface area. With each fold, more neurons could be packed, more connections woven, more possibilities opened. Science reveals that the neocortex is divided into lobes, each with its own specialties: occipital for vision, temporal for hearing and memory, parietal for touch and spatial sense, frontal for decision and planning. At first, in early mammals, these divisions were subtle, but even then the principle was established: division of labor across a unified surface. The brain was becoming not just a set of circuits, but a city of districts, each contributing to the whole. Think of it as a canvas, where earlier brains painted in simple strokes: fear, reflex, hunger. The neocortex allowed finer detail, shading, nuance. A sound was no longer just predator or prey. It could be analyzed for pitch, rhythm, even meaning. A movement was no longer just escape or attack. It could be planned, timed, adapted. The neocortex turned life into a richer picture, one with layers and depth. Philosophically, this marks the rise of possibility. The reptilian brain automated survival. The limbic system infused it with feeling, but the neocortex asked, what else? What lies beyond instinct? What could be imagined, remembered, improved? The neocortex is the organ of more connections, more ideas, more potential. Pause and consider the metaphor of folding. To fold is to increase depth without increasing size. A folded letter carries more words than a blank page. A folded fabric holds more strength than a flat one. Your neocortex, densely folded, carries the richness of consciousness in a space no larger than 2 fists. The very wrinkles of your brain are a testament to evolution's desire for efficiency and depth. In early mammals, the neocortex enabled sharper senses and more flexible behavior. A predator could adapt its hunting strategy. A prey animal could learn new escape routes. Over generations, these advantages magnified, giving mammals dominance in environments where reptiles once ruled. The neocortex did not replace the older brains. It layered itself atop them, integrating reflex and emotion with foresight and choice. And here is a subtle truth: you still carry these layers. When you act without thinking, it is your reptilian brain. When you feel deeply, it is your limbic system. When you reflect, plan, or imagine, it is your neocortex. You are not one brain, but many, stacked through time, cooperating and competing in the theater of your skull. The expansion of the neocortex also set the stage for social life. With more processing power, mammals could navigate not only landscapes but relationships. They could recognize individuals, remember bonds, and adjust behavior in groups. Cooperation, empathy, even deception, all required the flexible computations of the neocortex. Out of these networks grew the social structures that would one day culminate in human civilization. Picture again that folding surface, shimmering with activity. Each ridge carries billions of signals. Each valley hides countless connections. It is the most intricate surface in the known universe, yet it is carried quietly inside your head. To think, to speak, to dream, all are ripples on that folded canvas. But the story does not end with mammals in general. Within one branch, the primates, the neocortex would expand further, particularly in the frontal lobes. Here, in the territory of planning and decision, something extraordinary began to unfold: the ability to coordinate socially, to use tools to imagine futures. The stage of thought grew wider, and on it, the drama of humanity began its rehearsal. Imagine the dense canopy of an ancient forest. High above, branches weave into a living ceiling of green, and among them, nimble figures leap from limb to limb. These are the early primates, creatures with grasping hands, forward-facing eyes, and growing brains that whisper of something new. Deep inside their skulls, one region in particular begins to expand with remarkable ambition: the prefrontal cortex, the seat of planning, attention, and decision-making. In mammals before them, the neocortex had already unfolded into specialized lobes, but in primates, this structure did more than expand. It diversified. especially in the frontal regions. The prefrontal cortex allowed these animals not merely to react or remember, but to anticipate, to weigh possibilities, to hold back an impulse and wait for the right moment. A monkey deciding whether to grab a piece of fruit in the presence of a stronger rival is not simply reacting, it is calculating, balancing risk against reward. That calculation is the signature of the primate brain. Science shows us that this prefrontal growth gave primates remarkable advantages. They could coordinate in groups, sharing alarm calls and grooming rituals that strengthened bonds. They could use tools, shaping sticks to fish insects from bark or stones to crack nuts. They could even understand hierarchies, tracking who was dominant, who was ally, who was threat. These abilities required not only memory but foresight, a capacity to imagine outcomes and choose among them. Think of the prefrontal cortex as a chessboard in the mind. Each move represents a possible action, and the board allows several moves to be considered before choosing one. Where reptiles had only instinct and mammals had feeling, primates had strategy. The mind could now play scenarios, hold them in memory, and act with intention. Philosophically, this expansion of choice is profound. To calculate is to step away from inevitability. To plan is to imagine a future not yet real. In this way, the primate brain marked the dawn of agency, the sense that life could be shaped, not only endured. And with agency came responsibility, a weight carried quietly, even in the forests, where decisions about food, territory, and social ties meant life or death. Pause here and picture a small primate reaching for a branch. Its grip is strong, its aim precise, its leap measured. The movement itself is guided by the cerebellum and motor cortex. But the decision of where to leap, when to leap, and why, that comes from the prefrontal cortex. Already, the brain is layering survival with foresight, action with judgment. This capacity did not just shape individual lives, it reshaped groups. Early primates began to live in more complex societies where cooperation and conflict intertwined. Grooming behaviors built trust. Vocal calls warned of danger. Alliances shifted with time. To thrive in such environments, the brain needed not only to know the world but to know others. This was the rise of social intelligence, the ability to read intention, predict behavior, and adjust one's own actions accordingly. And here lies a philosophical reflection. To live socially is to live in mirrors. Each glance, each gesture, each sound reflects not only who you are, but who others expect you to be. The prefrontal cortex became the organ of reflection, not only inward but outward. To be primate is to be aware that you are seen. That awareness is both a gift and a burden, carrying the roots of empathy and the seeds of anxiety. From this expansion, another path began to form. Communication, once limited to calls and gestures, hinted at deeper possibilities. If sounds could signal danger or food, could they one day carry more ideas, feelings, even symbols? The circuits that shaped planning began to shape proto-language, preparing the ground for the extraordinary leap that would come with the human line. Picture again the forest canopy, alive with movement and sound. In the chatter of early primates, in their careful strategies and shifting alliances, you glimpse the beginnings of something vast. The stage is set for language itself, for circuits of sound and meaning that will transform thought into communication. The brain is about to find its voice. Picture a troop of early primates gathered in the safety of a tree. The air hums with calls, whistles, and rhythmic sounds. At first, these noises seem simple, signals of alarm, cries for food, invitations to groom. But listen more closely, and you notice patterns. The calls are not random, they are specific, tied to events, directed toward others. What you are hearing is not yet human language, but its early shadow, a proto-language, born of brain circuits just beginning to specialize. Inside these primate skulls, certain regions are starting to refine themselves. Near the frontal lobe, an area would later become known as Broca's region, essential for producing speech. Near the temporal lobe, another area, Proto-Wernicke's, began handling the interpretation of sound and meaning. Together, these circuits formed the first dialogue between expression and comprehension. Though still primitive, they gave these animals the ability to share not only raw emotion but intention. Science shows us that even monkeys today have calls for specific predators, distinct sounds for eagles, snakes, or leopards. These calls are understood by others, sparking immediate and appropriate reactions. The groundwork for symbolic communication is there, a sound standing for an idea. This is the seed of language, waiting to bloom. Think of it as the difference between a cry and a word. A cry bursts from the body as pure feeling. A word points beyond itself to meaning. Early primates lived in the space between, shaping sounds that were both emotional and informative. The brain circuits enabling this shift were not designed for poetry or philosophy, they were designed for survival, yet in their efficiency they carried the potential for much more. Philosophically, this moment is astonishing. To speak even in rudiments is to bridge minds. A sound leaves one throat and enters another's ear, carrying not just vibration but thought. It is the first attempt at shared inner life. Before writing, before art, before civilization, there was the leap of making meaning portable through sound. Pause and imagine the experience of one of these primates. It calls out a sound, sharp and urgent, and its companions scatter to safety. The sound itself is brief, but its effect is vast. It changes behavior, protects lives, and strengthens bonds. Already communication is more than reaction. It is coordination, a weaving together of separate selves into a collective rhythm. And here lies a reflection. Language is not simply invention, but evolution. It did not appear fully formed in humans. It grew from cries, calls, and gestures, sculpted by circuits of the brain long before Homo sapiens. Each word you speak today is a descendant of those first calls, each sentence a refinement of a survival tool, millions of years old. But proto-language also introduced a new dimension, deception. If a call could warn, it could also mislead. If a sound could unite, it could also manipulate. With communication came the possibility of dishonesty, strategy, and persuasion. The brain, having learned to share, also learned to conceal. From the very beginning, speech carried both truth and shadow. Over generations, these circuits deepened, gestures combined with sounds, rhythms combined with memory. The scaffolding of true language was forming, ready to be expanded by the growing brains of hominids. The stage was set for Australopithecus and the first humans of the genus Homo, beings who would take these proto-circuits and expand them into the vast cathedral of speech. Picture again that tree full of calls. What seems like noise is in fact the rehearsal of history's greatest performance, the rise of language. The next step belongs to creatures who walked upright, carrying not only bigger brains but also the spark of planning, tool use, and culture. Their brains were still small, but already the trajectory was clear, the leap from sound to symbol, from survival to meaning. Imagine the savannah at dawn. Tall grasses sway in golden light, and from their shelter emerges a figure unlike any before. Upright, though not yet fully human, it moves with a cautious grace. Its hands are free, its gaze lifted above the plain. This is Australopithecus, an ancestor who carried a small brain but a profound shift in posture and possibility. The brains of Australopithecines were little more than 1/3 the size of modern human brains, yet their structure already hinted at change. Walking upright freed their hands, allowing them to carry food, wield sticks, and eventually shape tools. This in turn demanded coordination between vision, planning, and motor control. The prefrontal cortex, though modest, began to stretch its influence. These creatures could plan short sequences of action, anticipate outcomes, and adapt their movements to new challenges. Science reveals that their brains, though small, were reorganized. The regions related to social behavior and tool use show signs of subtle expansion. They likely communicated with gestures and vocal calls richer than those of other primates, though still far from human language. Most importantly, their bipedal posture changed the trajectory of evolution. To walk upright required new balances in the brain, linking the cerebellum, motor cortex, and spatial systems in fresh ways. With posture came perspective. Literally, their eyes, raised above the grasses, saw farther, giving them an evolutionary advantage in scanning for predators and opportunities. Think of this as a metaphor. Sometimes growth is not in size, but in reorganization. A brain need not be massive to be meaningful. It needs only to connect in new ways. Australopithecus embodied this truth. With limited resources, their brains still produced leaps of behavior that reshaped survival. Philosophically, this moment speaks of beginnings. Small does not mean insignificant. Just as a seed carries the blueprint for a towering tree, these small-brained ancestors carried the foundation for art, language, and consciousness. Their intelligence was not yet symbolic, but it was purposeful. They could imagine tomorrow's meal, choose today's path, and plan for the safety of their young. This was the dawn of foresight, the earliest rehearsal of human imagination. Picture an Australopithecus family at rest near a cluster of rocks. One individual picks up a stick, probes the earth for insects, and discovers a feast of protein. Another observes, remembers, and imitates. What began as curiosity becomes tradition. Already, culture in its most primitive form is taking root. The brain is not only surviving, it is teaching. And yet their limitations were clear. Without a large frontal cortex, complex planning was beyond them. Their communication was still bound to cries and gestures, their social groups small and fragile. But evolution is patient. Each generation that survived carried forward not just genes but new habits, new adaptations. In time, these seeds would grow into something far greater. Pause and reflect on this. Walking upright was more than a change in movement. It was a change in perspective. To stand is to see farther, to free the hands, to shift balance from instinct to intention. Perhaps this is why standing often feels symbolic even today. Rising to speak, standing for a cause, lifting oneself in defiance. Our ancestors' first steps echo in the metaphors of human life. From these beginnings, the genus Homo would emerge. With larger brains, more advanced tools, and more complex societies, they would take the foundations of Australopithecus and build upon them. The first of these, Homo habilis, the handyman, would expand the frontal lobes and begin shaping stone tools with intent. In their hands, thought became matter, and the brain crossed another threshold in its long journey of evolution. The scene shifts to a riverbank more than 2 million years ago. A small group of hominids gathers around scattered stones. One of them, with careful strikes, chips a rock until sharp edges appear. This is Homo habilis, the handyman. And in this moment, the brain is doing something unprecedented, transforming imagination into tool. The brain of Homo habilis was larger than that of Australopithecus, nearing half the size of a modern human's, but more than size, its organization marked a turning point. The frontal lobes, especially the prefrontal cortex, expanded to support causal reasoning. If I strike this stone, I create an edge. If I use this edge, I can cut meat. This linking of action to consequence was more than instinct, it was thought. Science reveals that the stone tools of Homo habilis were not random, but deliberate. Known as Aldebaran tools, they required vision, planning, and motor precision. To create them, one had to hold an image in the mind and reproduce it in stone. This is the beginning of technology, the brain shaping the environment to extend itself. Think of it as an external memory. Each tool held knowledge, preserving it beyond the body. A sharp edge could outlast its maker, teaching the next user without words. This was not yet writing, but it was the first archive of thought, etched in stone rather than paper. Philosophically, the tools of Homo habilis carry immense meaning. They represent the shift from adaptation to invention. Most creatures survive by adjusting to their environment. Homo habilis began adjusting the environment to itself. This act is the seed of culture, technology, and civilization. In a chipped stone lies the blueprint of the modern world. Picture one of these early humans holding a tool, not just for today, but for tomorrow. A cut of meat saved hunger. A sharp edge defended against predators. Each tool carried forward the memory of past actions and the promise of future use. Already, the brain was weaving past, present, and future into a single thread. And here lies another reflection. Tools shape not only the world but the mind. Using a stone chisel refined hand-eye coordination, strengthened neural circuits for planning, and deepened social bonds as skills were shared. The brain and the tool co-evolved, each advancing the other. What began as survival became tradition, passed from one generation to the next. Pause, and imagine the sound of stone striking stone, echoing across a plain. Each strike is more than noise, it is a declaration that thought has entered matter. In that rhythm, you hear the heartbeat of human culture beginning to stir. But Homo habilis was only the beginning. Their tools were simple, their societies small, yet from their experiments would arise another species, with larger brains, more complex tools, and the courage to leave the African homelands. Homo erectus would stand taller, think deeper, and carry the story of the brain across continents. Picture the open savanna, stretching into a horizon of grass and sky. Among its shadows walks a figure taller, stronger, and more purposeful than those before. This is Homo erectus, the upright human, bearing a brain nearly twice the size of Homo habilis and carrying within it the seeds of something immense. With each step, their species pushed thought farther, tools sharper, journeys longer. The brain of Homo erectus reached almost 3/4 the size of a modern human's, and its frontal lobes showed further growth. This expansion brought not only better memory and planning, but also the capacity for symmetry. Their tools, known as Acheulean hand axes, were no longer crude flakes. They were carefully shaped, balanced on both sides, and polished with attention. To produce them required patience, foresight, and a mental image of perfection. Symmetry, once absent in nature's accidents, now emerged from the mind. Science reveals that Homo erectus was also the first of our ancestors to master fire. Fire meant warmth, protection, and the ability to cook food, which released more energy from the same meal. This energy in turn fed the growing brain. The relationship between fire and thought was circular. The brain discovered fire, and fire nourished the brain. From that cycle arose a leap in intelligence unmatched by other creatures of the time. But perhaps their most defining act was migration. Homo erectus spread beyond Africa, into Asia and Europe, braving climates and landscapes no hominid had faced before. Such journeys demanded planning, adaptation, and cooperation. They needed memory of paths, anticipation of seasons, and social bonds strong enough to endure hardship. To leave the familiar for the unknown is always a test of the mind, and Homo erectus passed it. Think of migration as a metaphor for thought itself. To move into new lands is to risk, to imagine what lies beyond sight, to prepare for what cannot be known. Each step across a plain, each river crossed, was a rehearsal of the imagination, a willingness to see possibility where none was visible. Their footprints, still found in hardened volcanic ash, are not just tracks of survival but of vision. Philosophically, this species teaches that intelligence is not only the power to create but the courage to leave. Every invention is a departure from the familiar. Every idea is a migration into the unknown. In this way, you carry the spirit of Homo erectus each time you venture beyond what is safe, whether into new lands or new thoughts. Picture one of them seated at a fire as night falls. The flames crackle, shadows dance, and faces gather close. The Acheulean axe rests at their side, a tool perfected by practice. The day's journey has been long, but the night is alive with warmth and safety. In that circle of firelight, something invisible stirs, the beginnings of culture, the silent weaving of memory, tradition, and shared story. From these roots, later species would grow. Neanderthals would inherit their large cranial capacity, refined culture, and develop language, and Homo sapiens, our kind, would stand on their shoulders, not with larger brains, but with more efficient ones, capable of art, abstraction, and self-awareness. But before that leap, there was another chapter, the rise of Homo neanderthalensis. They carried brains sometimes larger than ours, and their lives were marked not only by survival, but by culture, burials, ornaments, perhaps even language. Their story is a mirror held up to our own, asking what it truly means to be human. The landscape shifts to Ice Age Europe. Winds whip across frozen plains, glaciers loom in the distance, and caves offer fragile refuge from the cold. Here, another species of human rises, Homo neanderthalensis, the Neanderthals. Stocky, strong, and enduring, they carry within their skulls brains often larger in volume than those of modern humans. Yet their story is not only one of survival against bitter climates, it is a story of culture, of language in its earliest forms, and of the delicate boundary between us and them. The Neanderthal brain was remarkable, averaging slightly larger cranial capacity than Homo sapiens. But size alone is not destiny. The organization of their brains reveals subtle differences. Their occipital lobes, the regions at the back associated with vision, were pronounced, perhaps reflecting their need to survive in environments where sight was paramount for hunting and vigilance. Their parietal lobes, linked to spatial awareness, also played a major role, giving them extraordinary physical skill in navigating terrain, crafting tools, and stalking prey. What they may have lacked compared to Homo sapiens was the same efficiency and flexibility in the frontal lobes, the areas tied to abstraction, creativity, and symbolic thought. This does not mean they were primitive, far from it. Evidence shows that Neanderthals mastered fire, built shelters, made tools of striking sophistication, and lived in social groups with bonds strong enough to weather harsh winters. Their brains allowed them to thrive for nearly 300,000 years across continents. Imagine sitting beside one now. Their eyes would meet yours, intelligent and aware. They would understand gesture, tone, perhaps even rudimentary words. The gap between you would not feel insurmountable, it would feel uncomfortably close, as though you were looking at an older cousin, separated by subtle differences rather than vast distance. The Neanderthals are best known for their Mousterian tools, stone implements shaped with care, often using a technique called the Levallois method. This involved striking flakes from a prepared core, a process requiring foresight, planning, and an internal model of the final shape. To master it was to think in steps, holding in the mind not only the current strike, but also the sequence leading to the finished tool. These tools were not only weapons, some were scrapers for hides, used to prepare clothing against the cold, others were points for spears, hunting weapons capable of bringing down massive game such as mammoths. Neanderthals were engineers of necessity, shaping stone to extend their bodies, and in doing so extending their minds. Reflect on this. A tool is an idea given form, each chipped edge is a thought made durable. In their hands, stone was memory, knowledge preserved beyond the brain, carried into the future. Philosophically, this reveals a profound truth. The human story is not just biological but technological. Our ancestors survived not only by changing themselves but by changing the world around them. Neanderthals also mastered fire, a skill they likely inherited from Homo erectus. Fire was more than heat, it was culture. Around flames, communities gathered, food was cooked, stories spoken or gestured were likely shared. In caves across Europe, traces of hearths remain, blackened stone circles that whisper of warmth against bitter nights. Their shelters were ingenious. Some were caves, adapted with stone walls and animal skins. Others were open-air structures built from wood and bone, arranged in circles or ovals. These shelters reveal not just survival, but planning, cooperation, and the ability to transform environment into home. Pause and consider the philosophy of fire. To tame flame is to hold chaos in the palm of your hand. Fire can destroy, yet when controlled, it sustains. Perhaps it was here, in the glow of firelight, that the first sense of wonder took root, the recognition that the world is not only danger, but mystery. Did Neanderthals speak? The question lingers like an echo across time. For years, scientists debated, but evidence suggests they had the capacity for speech. Fossil remains show that they shared the FOXP2 gene, a genetic foundation linked to language in humans. Their vocal tracts, reconstructed from fossils, suggest they could produce a range of sounds, though perhaps not with the same clarity or speed as modern humans. Even without full language, their communication was complex. Archaeological evidence shows signs of cooperation in hunting and caregiving, both of which require coordination beyond instinct. Injured Neanderthals sometimes survived for years, tended by their companions. This implies not just survival but empathy, communicated through gesture, sound, or word. Philosophically, this raises a poignant reflection. To speak is not merely to convey information, it is to share inner life. If Neanderthals had even the beginnings of speech, they stood at the threshold of one of humanity's greatest gifts, the ability to make thought audible. Imagine a Neanderthal mother calming her child with a sound, or companions planning a hunt with gestures punctuated by vocal calls. These moments would have carried the essence of language, the bridging of minds. Neanderthals were not simply pragmatic. Evidence shows they may have buried their dead, sometimes with objects suggesting ritual or symbolic thought. In Shanidar Cave in Iraq, remains were found surrounded by pollen, sparking debate about whether flowers had been deliberately placed in burial. In other sites, bones of animals appear arranged, hinting at symbolic behavior. They also used pigments, red ochre, black manganese dioxide, possibly for body decoration or art. Perforated shells have been discovered, likely strung as ornaments. These signs suggest that Neanderthals engaged in aesthetic behavior, finding meaning not only in survival, but in beauty. Here we find philosophy carved into bone. To decorate is to declare that life is more than necessity. To bury is to suggest a sense of continuity beyond death. These acts whisper of consciousness looking beyond the present moment, of beings aware of time and its mystery. Within the Neanderthal brain, the limbic system, the circuitry of emotion, likely played as vital a role as in our own. Fossil evidence of injuries healed over years implies care, compassion, and the willingness to nurture those who could no longer contribute to the hunt. These acts cannot be explained by survival alone. They suggest bonds of love, of responsibility, of something resembling morality. Picture a wounded hunter, carried back to camp, tended for seasons despite being unable to provide. In that act, the Neanderthals proved that their minds were not machines of survival, but vessels of feeling. The amygdala, hippocampus, and prefrontal cortex wove together fear, memory, and care into the fabric of their lives. And yet, their emotional lives were not immune to darkness. Competition for resources, the stress of harsh climates, and encounters with other species, including early Homo sapiens, must have filled their lives with tension, love and conflict, compassion and aggression. These dualities were as much their inheritance as ours. Perhaps the most haunting part of the Neanderthal story is their meeting with Homo sapiens. Genetic evidence shows interbreeding between the two species. Even now, fragments of Neanderthal DNA live in you, shaping aspects of immunity, metabolism, even thought. This mingling blurs the line between us and them, reminding us that human identity is not a clear boundary, but a woven tapestry. Philosophically, this raises a question: what does it mean to be human? If Neanderthals loved, cared, spoke, decorated, and dreamed, are they truly other? Or are they a reflection of ourselves, a parallel path the universe once took? To look at a Neanderthal skull is to see a mirror distorted only slightly, a reminder that our uniqueness is fragile, not absolute. Around 40,000 years ago, the Neanderthals disappeared. The reasons remain debated: competition with Homo sapiens, climate shifts, dwindling populations, or a blend of all. But their absence is not total. In our DNA, in our tools, in our shared history, they live on. Their extinction was not erasure, but transformation, a passing of the torch. Pause and reflect. Extinction is not always disappearance. Sometimes it is absorption, the folding of one path into another. The Neanderthals are not gone, they are in you, in your bones and blood, in the echo of their choices carried forward through your lineage. The Neanderthal story prepares the stage for ours. They showed what a large brain could achieve: toolmaking, fire, culture, care. But their minds, vast though they were, could not leap into the same abstraction that Homo sapiens would. Where Neanderthals decorated, humans painted. Where Neanderthals buried, humans imagined afterlives. Where Neanderthals spoke in fragments, humans spoke in narratives. And yet, without Neanderthals, perhaps we would not be. Their DNA threads through ours. Their survival paved the way for our rise. They are both ancestor and sibling, both rival and kin. Their story is not separate from ours, it is interwoven, a reminder that evolution is not a straight ladder but a branching tree, where many limbs grow, and some break, yet all nourish the trunk. The next chapter is the leap of Homo sapiens, a leap not of size but of efficiency. In our lineage, the neocortex became not just larger, but more interconnected, allowing abstraction, art, and symbolic thought. Where Neanderthals lit fires in caves, Homo sapiens lit fires in the mind. And so we turn to ourselves, to the moment when the brain, already powerful, became something more, a storyteller, an artist, a dreamer of infinity. The world shifts again, and we stand at the threshold of our own species. The earth is still harsh, its climate unstable, but into this landscape steps a being with a face not so different from yours, Homo sapiens. Their brains are not vastly larger than those of Neanderthals, in fact sometimes smaller, but what they carry is something subtler, more decisive, not just mass, but efficiency, not just strength, but connection. Within their skulls, the neocortex has become more finely tuned, more networked, more capable of weaving information into patterns unseen by any species before. Imagine their minds as landscapes lit not by torches, but by networks of lanterns connected across valleys and hills. Each lantern is a cluster of neurons, and each connection between them is a bridge. In earlier species, the bridges were fewer, slower, more rigid. In Homo sapiens, they multiply, they quicken, they interweave until the whole landscape glows. What emerges from that glow is abstraction, the ability to think not only of what is present, but of what could be, to imagine, to symbolize, to dream. They begin to paint. In caves deep beneath the earth, flickering torchlight reveals walls alive with animals, horses, bison, mammoths, drawn with precision and grace. These are not idle doodles, they are symbols, perhaps of hunts, perhaps of spirits, perhaps of ideas that cannot be spoken, but must be shared. The act of painting is more than survival, it is reflection, the brain turning outward to mark the invisible. For the first time, thought leaves the mind and becomes external, etched in pigment and stone. This leap into symbolism transforms everything. Objects become not only tools, but tokens. A bead, a carving, a painted handprint on stone. They carry meaning beyond themselves. They represent belonging, identity, memory, To make a symbol is to declare we see the world not only as it is, but as it signifies, and in that act Homo sapiens begins to step fully into humanity. Science confirms that around this time the default mode network, those interconnected brain regions that activate during reflection, imagination, and storytelling, began to flourish. This network is like an inner stage where the mind rehearses what is not immediately real. It allows you to relive the past, anticipate the future, and create narratives of self. With its refinement, Homo sapiens developed a mind not only capable of living but of narrating life. Consciousness gained texture, depth, and continuity. Consider what it means to hold a story inside, to recall yesterday's hunt, to imagine tomorrow's migration, to invent a tale of why the stars burn above. All of these are the fruits of this new efficiency. The Neanderthal brain may have glimpsed such thoughts, but in Homo sapiens they blossomed. The human mind became a loom, weaving threads of memory, perception, and imagination into cloths of meaning. Philosophically, this leap suggests that the essence of humanity is not size or strength, but the ability to move beyond the immediate, to take a sound and make it a word, to take a mark and make it a symbol, to take a memory and make it a story. Abstraction is not escape from reality, but a deepening of it, a recognition that beneath every moment lies possibility. Picture a small group gathered by firelight. One speaks, using gestures and words to describe a hunt. The others listen, eyes wide, seeing through imagination what they did not see in life. In that moment, communication transcends the present. Experience becomes shareable, knowledge becomes portable, wisdom becomes collective. This is culture, the passing of mind to mind across time. It is no accident that art and tools advanced together. The same brain that could imagine a horse painted on a wall could imagine shaping bone into a needle or stone into a blade. Creativity was no longer confined to the present moment. It became recursive, building on itself. Each invention sparked another. Firelight became hearth, hearth became home, home became village. Out of abstraction grew society. And yet, this new mind carried new burdens. To imagine is also to fear what has not yet happened. To symbolize is also to dwell on loss. The brain that gave rise to art also gave rise to anxiety. To picture the future is to picture death, absence, endings. For the first time, humans not only survived mortality, but understood it. Symbols carved into graves whisper of this awareness. Beads placed with the dead, ochre sprinkled on bones, tools buried alongside bodies. These are not acts of instinct, but of meaning. Rituals born from minds that could not ignore the passage of time. Pause and reflect on what this means for you. Every abstract thought you carry, every dream, every worry, every metaphor is the descendant of this leap. You are not simply living in the present. You are a being stretched across time, held together by symbols and stories. This capacity is both gift and weight, wonder and sorrow. It is what makes you human. The efficiency of the Homo sapiens brain also transformed relationships. Bonds deepened, alliances grew, societies expanded. Cooperation became more than instinct. It became intentional, reinforced by shared beliefs and common rituals. Language flourished, not just as survival signal, but as a medium of poetry, persuasion, and law. With it, groups could coordinate hunts, resolve conflicts, pass traditions. Words became the architecture of civilization. Picture a child learning to speak in one of these early groups. Each sound mastered is not only communication, but initiation into the collective mind. To speak is to enter a web of shared meaning, to inherit the thoughts of countless generations. The child is not only learning words, the child is learning humanity. And here lies the reflection. The leap of Homo sapiens was not the leap of individuals, but of communities. No single mind could hold it all, but together, through language, art, and ritual, the collective became greater than the sum of its parts. The human brain is not only an organ, it is a bridge designed to link with others. Alone, it is extraordinary. In communion, it is infinite. From this point, the brain's trajectory changes. Evolution continues, but not only through biology. Cultural evolution takes over, accelerating faster than genes. Knowledge is preserved outside the body, in stories, tools, and symbols. The brain no longer evolves alone, it evolves with culture, each shaping the other. Humanity becomes a species not only of flesh, but of meaning. Yet even this was not the final leap. To create symbols is one step, to create a self is another. In time, the efficient neocortex and the weaving default mode network gave rise to something more astonishing still, a narrative consciousness, the ability to see oneself as a character in the story of time. Out of abstraction grew identity, and with it the profound awareness of being. You sit in silence, and within you a voice begins to speak, not aloud, not even in words at first, but as a stream of images, sensations, and fragments of memory stitched together into a quiet narrative. You think of who you were yesterday, of who you might be tomorrow, and of the strange fact that both belong to the same being you call yourself. This is not instinct, nor is it simple memory. It is the birth of narrative consciousness, the sense of being a character within the unfolding story of time. The human brain carries many gifts inherited from its ancestors: reflex from reptiles, emotion from mammals, memory from early hominids. But with the rise of Homo sapiens, something more intricate emerged: the ability to bind these gifts into a story, to weave the past and future into a single thread that stretches across existence. This thread is not just recollection, not just prediction, it is identity, the feeling that I persists despite change. Deep within the skull, the default mode network hums when the body rests. Unlike the circuits for sight or sound, this network comes alive when the mind turns inward. Its regions, scattered across the frontal, temporal, and parietal lobes, light up as if conversing, trading fragments of memory, imagination, and self-reflection. Together, they create a theatre where the self is both actor and audience. Even when you are quiet, even when no task demands attention, this network rehearses your life, replaying old scenes, anticipating new ones, asking who am I and what comes next. Think of it as a loom in perpetual motion. Memory threads enter from one side, imagination threads from the other, and in the middle, they are woven into the tapestry of self. No other species, as far as we know, weaves with such richness. A chimpanzee may remember a place where fruit grows, may even anticipate its return, but a human remembers the journey, imagines sharing the fruit, wonders whether tomorrow will bring enough, and tells the story of it all to others. In this layering, identity blooms. Philosophically, this is staggering, for to possess narrative consciousness is to live twice, once in the present moment, and again in the inner story that frames it. You do not merely act, you interpret your actions. You do not merely live, you give your living meaning. This doubling is both blessing and burden. It allows you to make sense of existence, but it also confronts you with questions no instinct can answer. Who am I? Why am I here? What happens when I end? Pause and picture an early human sitting by a fire. Around them the tribe eats in silence. But in that person's mind a voice speaks. I hunted today. I succeeded. I am strong. Or perhaps I failed. I am ashamed. I must do better. These silent stories shape behavior, build memory, guide tomorrow's choices. Over time, as language flourished, such inner voices became outer ones. Stories moved from the private mind to the shared circle, from thought to tradition. Narrative consciousness became collective consciousness. Culture carried in tales passed from mouth to mouth. The gift of narrative is not only in recounting what happened, but in imagining what could. To picture the future is to step into possibility, to test paths without walking them. This mental rehearsal gives humans an extraordinary advantage. Before building a tool, you imagine its form. Before crossing a river, you imagine its dangers. Before trusting another, you imagine their betrayal. The mind becomes a stage where countless futures can be played before one is chosen. And yet, narrative consciousness also carries shadows. To imagine the future is to imagine loss, failure, death. No other animal grieves in advance, yet humans do so constantly. The same circuits that produce art and invention also produce worry and despair. To live as a narrative being is to carry both hope and dread, both beauty and sorrow. The mind is no longer simply a survival machine. It is a storyteller, and stories, once born, cannot be silenced. Reflect on this in your own life. You are not only living in this moment, you are carrying the echo of who you were and the anticipation of who you will be. Every decision is shaped by the story you tell yourself. Some stories empower. I am capable. I will endure. Others imprison. I am unworthy. I will fail. The brain does not distinguish easily between fact and fiction when it comes to narrative. The self you believe in becomes the self you live. In this way, identity is not fixed but created, retold with every reflection. Narrative consciousness also reshaped social life. To tell a story is to build a bridge between minds. to share experience across individuals. Around early fires, stories of hunts, storms, and ancestors wove communities together. They explained the world, offered lessons, inspired courage. Over time, these stories grew into myth and religion, into art and philosophy, into the vast architecture of culture. All of it rests upon the brain's ability to see life as a tale with continuity. Imagine a child hearing a story from an elder, eyes wide in the glow of firelight. The child is not only entertained, they are inheriting an identity. The story tells them who their people are, what matters, what to fear, what to hope for. This passing of narrative is how cultures survive, how values endure, how human life transcends the individual. Without the default mode network, without narrative consciousness, none of this would be possible. Philosophically, one must ask, are we the authors of our stories, or merely characters within them? The brain weaves narrative automatically, often without our consent. Memories are reshaped, details altered, meanings revised. The story you tell yourself about yesterday is not identical to what occurred, yet it feels true, and in feeling true, it shapes your future. Perhaps identity itself is not a fixed essence, but a story continually rewritten. Consider this paradox. The self you believe in may be an illusion, but it is a necessary one. Without narrative, life would be a sequence of isolated moments, disconnected and meaningless. With narrative, life gains continuity, coherence, direction. Even if the story is imperfect, it offers a sense of belonging in time. To exist as human is to exist as a tale told both inwardly and outwardly. And so, the brain that once only fled predators or sought food, now also contemplates itself. It wonders at its own existence, questions its own purpose, dreams of futures unseen. In the quiet hum of the default mode network, humanity discovers both its greatness and its fragility, for in telling our stories, we also confront their inevitable end. The emergence of narrative consciousness was not the last gift of evolution, for the brain, though vast, is not fixed. It bends, reshapes, adapts with each experience. The same circuits that weave identity also change as identity changes. This plasticity is not an accident. It is the inheritance of all evolution, condensed into the organ that defines us. To understand it is to understand how the brain, though ancient, is always becoming new. The story of the brain could end with its structures, its circuits, its astonishing leaps through time, but the most extraordinary truth is that it does not end. The brain is not a finished sculpture carved once and left unchanged. It is a living clay, reshaping itself in response to the world, adapting moment by moment, folding experience into form. This capacity is called plasticity, and it is one of the greatest inheritances of evolution. From the very beginning, flexibility was life's strategy. The earliest nerve nets of jellyfish changed as they encountered new waters. The ganglia of worms reorganized depending on sensation. In fish and mammals, unused connections were pruned, while active ones strengthened. Each step of evolution carried forward not only complexity but malleability, the capacity to adapt to changing demands. By the time of Homo sapiens, this plasticity was refined into a principle that shapes every thought, every memory, every skill. Imagine a path in a forest. The more often you walk it, the clearer it becomes. The grass pressed flat, the soil compacted, the trees leaning aside. In the brain, neural pathways follow the same rule. Every time a signal travels between two neurons, the connection strengthens. The more it is repeated, the more efficient it becomes. This principle, known as Hebbian learning, cells that fire together, wire together, is the basis of all memory and learning. To practice is to etch deeper trails into the forest of the mind. But plasticity is not only about repetition, it is about transformation. If one path is blocked, another can be carved. If one region is injured, others can adapt. Children born with parts of their brains missing sometimes develop near normal function because other regions take over the task. After stroke, patients may relearn speech or movement as the brain reassigns circuits to new purposes. This resilience is not perfection, but it is possibility, the ability to rebuild, to reorganize, to begin again. Pause and reflect on what this means for your own life. Every skill you master, every habit you repeat, every story you tell yourself is shaping your brain. Plasticity is not an abstract concept, it is embodied in you. When you learn a language, your brain carves new networks. When you practice music, it thickens pathways of rhythm and coordination. When you reflect on your past, it reshapes the wiring of memory. You are not only living through your brain, you are sculpting it. Philosophically, this raises profound questions. If the brain changes with every thought, is there such a thing as a permanent self, or are you a river, flowing and reshaping with time? The memories you hold most dearly are not static, they shift with each recall, altered by mood, context, and reinterpretation. The skills you once lacked may now feel innate, etched into circuits that were once blank. You are continuity, yes, but also flux. Plasticity teaches that identity is process, not product. Plasticity also explains why culture and environment matter so deeply. A child raised among music develops enhanced auditory networks. A child immersed in language becomes fluent without effort, their brain tuned to the rhythms of speech. Trauma too leaves its mark, shaping circuits of fear, vigilance, and pain. The brain absorbs its environment, weaving experience into its very structure. To change the world around you is, inevitably, to change the brain within you. Consider the double-edged nature of this inheritance. Plasticity is freedom, but it is also vulnerability. The same brain that can learn wisdom can also learn despair. Habits of thought, repeated too often, become grooves difficult to escape. Anxiety can carve deep channels. Depression can reinforce dark loops. Addiction can bind circuits tightly. Plasticity does not judge, it obeys. It strengthens whatever it is given, whether joy or suffering. This is why awareness matters, because what you feed your mind becomes what your mind is. Picture again the forest path. You may feel trapped by the trail you have walked 1,000 times, yet plasticity whispers that new paths are always possible. With effort, attention, and patience, the grass can grow back, the soil can loosen, new trails can be cut. It may take time, but the brain is never fixed. Its very essence is change. Science shows that even in old age, the brain retains plasticity. Neurons may die, but others sprout new connections. Practice and learning remain possible. The myth that the brain hardens permanently is false. What does diminish is opportunity. New experiences are fewer, habits more entrenched, but the capacity to reshape never fully disappears. Until death, the brain is alive with potential. Philosophically, this truth carries both comfort and challenge. It comforts because no one is trapped forever. Change is always possible. It challenges because no one is exempt from shaping themselves. Every choice leaves its mark. To live is to sculpt, whether consciously or unconsciously. The question is not whether you will change, but how. Plasticity also reveals why humanity has advanced so rapidly. Biological evolution is slow, requiring generations for change, but cultural evolution, powered by plastic brains, is fast. A single human can learn, adapt, and teach others within one lifetime. Knowledge accumulates not only in genes but in experience, passed from one mind to another. Fire, language, art, science, all spread because the brain is capable of absorbing and transmitting culture. Without plasticity, there would be no history, no progress, no civilization. Pause to imagine the first humans teaching their children to strike flint or weave baskets. Each demonstration etched new circuits in young brains. Each correction strengthened the path. Each repetition built culture into biology. The brain became not just an organ of survival, but a vessel for tradition. Every generation inherited not only DNA, but also the invisible architecture of skills and stories carried in the pliable circuits of plasticity. And yet, plasticity has limits. The brain cannot become anything at will. It is constrained by biology, by age, by environment. Not every dream can be realized, not every wound healed, but within these limits lies immense freedom, the freedom to adapt, to grow, to redirect. To honor plasticity is not to imagine infinite possibility, but to recognize the extraordinary within the possible. Reflect again when you remember, when you learn, when you choose a new habit, you are engaging in evolution made personal. Evolution once shaped the species across millennia. Plasticity now shapes the individual across a lifetime. In this sense, you are both creature and creator, both inheritor of ancient design and author of your own becoming. The story of the brain is not only one of structures fixed in time, it is one of endless becoming. From the first nerve nets to the complexity of modern thought, every step has been guided by adaptation. Plasticity is the thread connecting them all. It is why neurons first gathered into nets, why ganglia centralized, why the cortex folded, why memory deepened, why language blossomed. Without it, evolution itself would have been impossible. With it, The brain carries not only its past, but its future. And so, the journey continues. The brain you carry now is ancient, yet new. It holds the marks of creatures long gone, yet reshapes itself with every heartbeat of experience. It is not a stone, but a river, winding endlessly, carrying the silt of memory, carving new channels of thought. From this river, the modern brain rises. 86 billion neurons, trillions of connections, a cathedral of signals balancing attention, memory, and emotion. To understand this modern brain is to see plasticity in its fullest expression, the culmination of evolution's patience, and the promise of its future. The modern brain is a cathedral of astonishing scale, a living architecture made of 86 billion neurons, and the countless trillions of synapses that link them. To enter it in imagination is to walk into a city brighter and more complex than any you have ever known, a city that never sleeps, where signals spark like lanterns, where highways of white matter connect districts of thought, and where every flicker of light corresponds to an idea, a sensation, or a memory. This is the brain you carry, the brain that evolution has sculpted over hundreds of millions of years, the brain that sits behind your eyes and quietly governs every moment of your life. Within this city, nothing stands alone. Neurons fire in harmony, forming networks that balance attention, memory, emotion, and movement. Some networks light quickly, flashing signals across the cortex like lightning. Others hum more slowly, weaving long-term patterns of identity and reflection. If you could watch them from above, you would see rhythms, oscillations, waves of electrical activity rippling in synchrony. These rhythms are the music of thought, guiding how attention shifts, how memories are recalled, how moods rise and fall. The sheer number of neurons is staggering, but the true power lies in their connections. Each neuron can reach out to thousands of others, forming webs of possibility so vast they defy comprehension. The total number of synapses in a single brain exceeds the stars in the Milky Way. Within these connections lies the capacity for art, for science, for love, for despair. Every word you speak, every face you recognize, every plan you imagine is a pattern etched into this network, a unique constellation that flickers into being for a moment before dissolving back into potential. Imagine now how these regions divide their labor. At the back of the brain, the occipital lobe translates photons into sight, turning raw light into landscapes, faces, colors, and shadows. Along the sides, the temporal lobes interpret sound, music, and the meanings of words, while also housing memories like libraries stacked with your past. At the crown, the parietal lobes map space, allowing you to know where your body is, to reach and grasp, to walk without stumbling. At the front, the prefrontal cortex weighs decisions, plans futures, imagines outcomes, and holds the fragile threads of self-control. Each lobe is a district, but none stands alone. They speak constantly, trading signals through bundles of white matter, like bridges between neighborhoods in the city of thought. The brain's networks are often divided into systems, each one with a role to play. The attentional networks act like spotlights, shifting focus from one stimulus to another, deciding what matters and what fades into background. The salience network detects importance, alerting you when a sound, a face, or a threat deserves attention. The limbic network weaves feeling into experience, ensuring that joy and fear are remembered more vividly than neutrality. And the default mode network, that quiet hum in the background, constructs your narrative self, linking past to future, weaving the story of who you believe yourself to be. Philosophically, to understand these systems is to understand that the self is not a single thing but a chorus. You may feel whole, yet what you experience as unity is in fact a negotiation among many voices. Attention pulls one way, emotion another, memory another still. The self is not an emperor commanding a body, but a parliament of networks, sometimes harmonious, sometimes in conflict, always in motion. To be human is to live within this parliament, to find coherence where none is guaranteed. The modern brain is also shaped by rhythm. Neurons fire not only in patterns but in cycles, generating brain waves that pulse at different speeds. Slow delta waves roll during sleep, guiding restoration. Theta waves emerge in memory and creativity, drifting like tides. Alpha waves calm the mind, focusing attention inward. Beta and gamma waves spark with activity, carrying fast computations and moments of insight. These rhythms are not merely background, they are the tempo of consciousness, the heartbeat of thought itself. Consider how memory works within this vast network. When you recall a face, it is not retrieved from a single box. Instead, fragments stored in different regions, shape, color, emotion, context, are reassembled in a moment, like shards of glass forming a mosaic. This reassembly is never perfect. Each recall alters the memory slightly, reshaping it in light of the present. Thus, your past is not static but fluid, rewritten each time you remember. This truth, revealed by science, carries deep reflection. Your identity, anchored in memory, is not a fixed archive but a story constantly revised. Emotion flows through the brain like color through glass. The amygdala alerts, the hippocampus binds memory to feeling, the prefrontal cortex evaluates and regulates. A single experience may ignite joy, fear, anger, or love, depending on how these regions converse. Emotion is not separate from reason, but entwined with it. Every decision is tinged with feeling, every thought colored by mood. To imagine a purely rational mind is to imagine a brain stripped of its humanity, reduced to calculation without care. Philosophically, this entanglement of emotion and thought is the heart of what it means to be human. To feel deeply is not a weakness of reason, but its foundation. Love gives direction to choice. Fear gives weight to caution. Joy gives meaning to survival. A mind without emotion might think clearly, but it would not live fully. The modern brain is also a master of prediction. Every perception, every action is shaped not only by the present, but by what the brain expects to happen. When you listen to a melody, your brain predicts the next note. When you see a face, it predicts the next expression. Prediction is so fundamental that most of what you experience is not raw input, but expectation refined by reality. This is why the world feels coherent, why you are not overwhelmed by chaos. The brain is constantly guessing, correcting, and learning, painting reality from within as much as from without. Imagine this predictive brain as a storyteller. It does not simply record events, it anticipates, filling gaps with narrative. This is why you see patterns in clouds, meaning in coincidence, stories in chance. The brain abhors randomness, seeking order even where none exists. Philosophically, this reveals the origin of myth, science, and art alike. The drive to find meaning, to transform chaos into story. The predictive brain is the source of both knowledge and illusion. The sheer adaptability of the modern brain is also its hallmark. Across cultures, environments, and histories, the same basic structure produces endless diversity. A child raised among musicians develops enhanced auditory cortex. A child immersed in dance develops refined motor networks. The brain molds itself to culture, and culture in turn shapes the brain. This coevolution is why humanity is not defined only by biology, but by the stories, skills, and traditions that brains carry forward. Philosophically, this adaptability raises a profound reflection. The brain is not just inside the skull, it extends into tools, language, and culture. When you write, your words become external memory. When you use technology, it becomes an extension of your senses. The brain has always reached beyond itself, first in stone tools, then in fire, then in writing, now in digital networks. Humanity is not bound by its biology, but expanded by it, continually extending its mind into the world. But the modern brain is also fragile. Its complexity makes it vulnerable to imbalance. Circuits of attention may falter into distraction, circuits of emotion may spiral into anxiety or depression, circuits of memory may dissolve into forgetfulness. Plasticity, that great inheritance, can etch both wisdom and suffering. The same pathways that learn joy can learn despair, and the brain, loyal to repetition, may reinforce either. This fragility is not failure, but consequence. The cost of carrying such vast possibility. Reflect on this fragility in yourself. Every habit you repeat, every story you tell yourself, every focus of attention shapes the patterns of your brain. To care for the mind is to care for the organ that creates the very sense of who you are. The brain is not separate from identity. It is identity, fluid and fragile, capable of beauty and pain. And so, the modern brain is not the end of evolution, but its living expression. It carries within it the layers of history, reptilian reflexes, mammalian emotion, primate sociality, human abstraction. It is a palimpsest, each layer written atop the last, yet none erased. When you act instinctively, you feel the reptile. When you love, you feel the mammal. When you plan, you feel the primate. When you dream, you feel the human. To be modern is to be ancient, to carry in one organ the story of all who came before. Philosophically, the modern brain is a mirror of the universe itself, complex, dynamic, self-reflective. It observes, and in observing, it becomes aware of itself. It is both subject and object, both question and answer. In it, the cosmos has folded back to contemplate its own existence. To look at the stars and wonder is not separate from the stars themselves, for the brain is their descendant, their continuation in thought. As you sit now listening to these words, your brain is alive with networks of attention, memory, and imagination. Neurons fire, synapses strengthen, circuits reshape. You are not only learning, you are becoming. The story of the brain is not behind you, it is happening in you, moment by moment, as plasticity rewires, as narratives deepen, as meaning expands. The cathedral of 86 billion neurons is not fixed stone, but living fire, always flickering, always remade. From here, only one step remains in this journey, reflection itself. To turn back and see the whole story, from the first nerve nets to the cathedral of the human brain, is to see that the brain is not only an organ, but a mirror. In its evolution is the story of life, of matter becoming mind, of the universe awakening to itself. To arrive here is to arrive not at an ending, but at an awareness that you are both the question and the answer, both the traveler and the path. The long story circles back to you. You sit now with the weight of countless ages resting inside your skull, a living archive of oceans, forests, savannas, firelit caves, and the whispers of ancestors whose names were never spoken. The human brain is not simply flesh folded into ridges, it is the universe condensed into 86 billion sparks, each one whispering a fragment of the story that began when cells first reached out to touch each other in the sea. When you think, you echo fish and reptiles. When you love, you echo mammals. When you plan, you echo primates. When you create, you echo sapiens. Nothing is lost, nothing wasted. Every ancestor lives in your anatomy, every survival carved into your circuitry. To look inward is to look backward in time, to carry within you the pulse of creatures long gone. To reflect on this journey is to feel its vastness, the earliest nerve nets floating in jellyfish, the tubes of primitive embryos, the ganglia of flatworms, the triune divisions of fish, the cerebellum refining movement, the amygdala shaping fear, the reptilian stem driving instinct, the limbic ring giving rise to love, the hippocampus mapping time, the neocortex unfolding thought, the primates grasping, the proto-language of calls, the Australopithecine step, the tool of Habilis, the fire of Erectus, the culture of Neanderthals, the symbols of sapiens, the narrative of self, the plasticity that allows change, and finally the cathedral of the modern brain. Each step is alive in you, stacked like geological layers beneath your awareness, invisible yet unbroken. Think of how improbable this is, a cluster of atoms, born in stars, shaped into molecules, arranged into cells, gathered into tissues, refined into neurons, and somehow into thought. Out of chaos came pattern, out of pattern came awareness, out of awareness came the question of existence. The brain is not only a product of the universe, it is the universe thinking, the cosmos gazing into its own mirror. Pause and imagine the silence of space, the great emptiness between stars. Now imagine your own silence, sitting still in the dark. Both are vast, both are deep, yet in your silence there is reflection. This is the difference your brain has made. The void has found a way to wonder about itself. Philosophically, this realization changes what it means to be human. You are not separate from nature, not an exception to evolution's rule. You are its flowering. You are the outcome of matter yearning toward awareness, the universe folding back upon itself so that it may look and ask, "What am I?" To contemplate your brain is to contemplate the cosmos, because in its signals you find not only survival but wonder. The reflection also invites humility. The brain, for all its brilliance, is fragile. Its balance can be disrupted by injury, by illness, by the smallest chemical imbalance. Its memories can fade, its stories fracture, its identity dissolve. It is both cathedral and ruin, miracle and vulnerability. To understand its fragility is to honor its beauty, to care for it as one would care for a rare flame. And yet, fragility does not diminish wonder, it deepens it. That such a delicate organ can produce music, love, mathematics, and philosophy is astonishing. That it can survive trauma, adapt through plasticity, and continue to learn even in age is evidence of resilience beyond measure. Fragility and strength are not opposites here, they are the same truth seen from different angles. Philosophically, the brain asks us to reconsider what permanence means. Nothing in it is fixed, everything is in motion. Memories shift, pathways strengthen or fade, networks adapt. To be human is to live in change, to be both the same and never the same. The continuity you call self is real, but it is woven from impermanence. You are a river, not a stone. As you reflect on this journey, notice how it mirrors your own life. You began as a cluster of cells, formed a neural tube, built layers upon layers of capacity. You learnt, you forgot, you changed. Your brain carries your entire personal history, just as it carries the history of evolution. To know it is to know yourself, both in the intimacy of memory and in the vastness of time. This understanding does not require answers. The brain was not built to solve the ultimate mystery, only to live within it, to dance between questions and possibilities, to sit quietly with wonder may be the highest act of consciousness. Imagine now the final image, the human brain as the universe gazing inward, each neuron a star, each network a galaxy, each thought a constellation forming and dissolving. Within this cosmic mirror, you glimpse both your origin and your destiny. You are not separate from the stars, but continuous with them, not an observer of the cosmos, but its expression. When you wonder, the cosmos wonders. When you reflect, the cosmos reflects. When you love, the cosmos knows itself as love. So you breathe, and you feel the weight of your lineage. You let the rhythm of thought slow, like a tide retreating. You rest in the knowledge that the story of the brain is also the story of you, a story of becoming, of adaptation, of fragile brilliance. And as you sit with that knowledge, you find peace in the simplest truth of all, that to be alive, to be aware, to be here now, is already enough.